Critical infrastructure research. Again, I'll just touch on a few. Probably just move along here so we've got some time for discussion. A couple from the Christchurch earthquake, a critical infrastructure construction business, the power company. We won't talk about the power company one just from a time standpoint. The Australian water industry benchmark study, which I mentioned a little bit about already. The economics of resilience infrastructure, we'll touch on that. A study that we're doing with about 60 or 70 lifelines or critical infrastructure organizations in the North Island. If that comes off, it looks like it's going to. It's got some legs underneath it. So that'll be a very interesting study because it'll be like the Australian water study, except across multiple sectors. So the infrastructure construction company, they're a business of about 800 employees and $150 million per year, which is, for New Zealand, a large business. Most of their business in Christchurch, but not all of it. Mainly underground pipes, so waters, wastewater, sewage, okay, primarily. So they did some significant part of the repairs, but not all of them. There were other players in that market. 4th of September earthquake comes along. They do a fabulous job of getting the water back on and getting things working again. About 5 days and things were starting to get back to normal. The CEO was right down in the ditches with the troops. You know, he was going to make sure this thing got done properly, and he did. But there were some unintended consequences of that decision, I can tell you, because the damage from the first earthquake was about $4 or $5 billion. About $1.5 billion to $2 billion was in the infrastructure. That's a lot of new contracts. Do you know how much of those contracts this company got? The number is that number there? 0. Okay, 0. Why on earth did they get none of it? Because the CEO was down in the ditches. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't have been down there. What I'm saying is he needs to set aside some of his time to pay attention to the big picture. He missed the big picture and their business could have imploded completely and disappeared as a consequence. It didn't, though, because he, like the other guy I mentioned earlier, had a reasonable share of humility and not too much hubris. He was prepared to acknowledge to his staff, he said, I screwed up. We got none of these jobs. You guys did a great job, the emergency team, getting the water back on, but I screwed up. Okay, I took my eye off the ball, and he initiated an internal review and an external review. They had a pretty good learning culture. They had a willingness to take risks already, reasonable, bounded risks already. And so he was just emulating the culture of the organization. It was wisdom on his part. They discovered a whole lot. And by the time of the second earthquake, much worse. Today, they're a business of about 1,600 employees and $250 million in business, more than twice the size. Now you might say, well, of course, there's all of this business to be done. That's true, but they lost all of it the first time around. And if they continued doing what they were doing, they probably wouldn't exist today. Somebody else would have come in and eaten their lunch completely. And now they're double because he had the good sense to say, I don't know the answer, but I believe that together we can discover the answer. The other thing, he discovered some other things. He said they did a pretty piss-poor job of looking after their employees after the earthquake. A social capital that you build by caring for your people, not just caring for the task, but being concerned about the people. They didn't do a good job after the first earthquake. Also, they ended up with 2 teams. You had the disaster team. They're heroes. They did a fabulous job getting the water back on. And you got the other team. That's everybody else, feeling left out in the rain, didn't participate in the heroship. They feel like, we're a waste of space. And what do you think happened to the morale of that 3/4 of the business? Zzz, in a tailspin. He said, we're not going to run our business that way anymore. We're going to have one team. We're going to have one team. Now, some progress on that. Is it perfect? No, I think they've got room to go. Definitely. But they're doing okay. All right. So, and you can see from those 13 indicators, there's a range of issues going on there. You've got leadership, you've got staff engagement, the process for decision making, you've got the kind of partnering they've got in place. You've got a range of indicators having implications on how effective their overall resilience is. This project that we've had funded recently from central government called the Economics of Resilient Infrastructure, I'll just touch on that. I haven't got much to tell you about it yet, apart from what its shape looks like, because we only just started. We're about 6 months into a 4-year project. But the goal of it is to build an economic model that's quite different from your typical economic model. Your typical economic model plugs a bunch of numbers in, it'll shock the system, and it'll run to equilibrium. They call it CGE, Computable General Equilibrium Model, and out the end will pop your economy will go up 5 billion or down 5 billion. Your economy. That's the economy of the entire country. All right? Unless the model has been built specifically for a state or city, which they don't do because they don't have the money, you're going to get this model that tells you something, but you're not sure exactly what it means. And that's the sort of model we had at the time of the earthquakes. And it's quite typical. We're aiming at quite a different model, built in quite a different way. We're aiming at one that is spatially and temporally dynamic. What does that mean? What that means, taking Christchurch as an example. The earthquake happens. One side of our city really badly devastated. The other side, you'd almost think nothing had happened, except that now all the traffic is on that side. We had no traffic before. Now we got huge traffic problems because of the population movements and a range of other things. Well, a spatially dynamic model would tell you, plug the numbers in, and this is what's likely to happen to your city. This side's going to be ruined because the numbers have to be sufficiently robust to be able to tell you what areas are badly damaged. And we knew we had a liquefaction map from 15 years before that told us what the state of the city would be in a big earthquake if liquefaction became a problem. So we could have plugged those numbers in if this model had been working. Assuming we actually are successful in building the model. We believe we will be, but we're only 6 months in. Spatially explicit. This part of the city, not that flash. This part, not so good. This part, which is 30 miles outside the city, is going to be doing fabulous. That's spatially explicit. It's not $5 billion is going to be a negative or positive impact overall, but it's going to have this dynamic to it. That's the spatial part. The temporal part is, right now we get a number, pops out, and we don't know whether that's a 5 billion improvement or dip. You know one of those two. Let's say it's down by 5 billion, some number. But we don't know whether it's next year, in 5 years, or 10 years. They'll give us an estimate, but the time frames that are built into these models often are not that good. This one, though, if it works the way we expect, will tell us that after 6 months we're going to have a big dip, and then it'll bounce back to normal, and then we will have another dip because some of the population leaves, and then we'll see a significant rise as the rebuild of the infrastructure happens, and then another wave on top of that as the housing gets rebuilt, and another longer wave as the commercial buildings get rebuilt, and then we'll have a big downturn in 10 years. Now that's useful information. You can use that to plan. You can use that to decide where you're going to rebuild first and what pieces you're going to put together. That's useful. Telling me that I'm going to have a loss of $5 billion, it's not useless, but the usefulness is limited, let's say. Right? So that's our goal. It will be reflective of real business behaviors. That's our piece. So we've got economists who are building the model. Our job, Resilient Organization's job, is to continue to survey and do case studies with Christchurch businesses on what would you do if you lost power? What did you do? Because the assumption of these normal models is no power, no production. Okay, no production, that means it's dropped to zero. We know that's not true. So what is closer to the truth? And we have some ideas about that already, and we'll continue to survey the Christchurch business and organizational community over the next 4 years to discover more of that, so that the model is tuned to reflect human behavior, not just some assumptions that are probably not true. Objective, support critical infrastructure investment and decision making. So you can say, actually, if you invest $1 billion this year, it'll save you $5 billion when the big earthquake hits Wellington, something like that. What's the question? You have to feed it with a substantive sort of scenario. So it's very multidisciplinary. The model of how we're working. Here's our model: spatially explicit, dynamic economic model. What a terrible name. We're working on a better one. We're having a lottery over a better one. So that's our economists at work. We will feed some scenarios in there. One of the scenarios will be the Christchurch scenario. That one we have a lot of data on, real data of what really happened. We'll also do a scenario for Auckland. Auckland is a seismic area, yes, but its biggest danger are volcanoes. And so we'll build a scenario, a detailed scenario around that to see, what does that look like, and some other scenarios as well. Business behaviors, that's our piece. Mitigation options. So what would you do to overcome the effect of that particular shock at the best cost effectiveness ratio? Okay, so mitigation options. And then obviously the economic model needs to have a reporting engine. So those are the components of that project. Watch this space. Okay, keep an eye on our website. As we publish stuff, it goes straight on our website. Unless it goes into an internationally refereed academic journal and they want to keep it all to themselves. But we found a way around that. A legal way around that. So I'll just finish off, just touch on some key concepts, and then we can have good old Nasher answer questions and talk. So what are some of the key concepts? If you're doing scenario planning, start with the consequences, not with the event. Don't start with the earthquake or the flood or the attack. Why? The reason is if you start with the event, it immediately puts a straitjacket on the way you look at it. You'll still pick up a bunch of consequences, but there'll be a whole bunch of consequences that will never cross your mind because you have already something too strong in your mind. Use the events as a mechanism for communicating what you want done, because people will understand that. Whereas if you just give them generic consequences, they may not get that. But start with the consequences, because you'll come up with a much broader range of possibilities. You won't be so straitjacketed in your thinking, and you're more likely to get close to reality. It's a bit like this. I think it was Ike Eisenhower. He said, plans are useless, but planning is invaluable. The process of thinking is invaluable. But if you build a plan and you think it's going to be helpful to you, I can tell you right now that is mostly not true. That infrastructure company, critical infrastructure company, who could have lost all of their business after the first earthquake, they had a business continuity plan. Guess what? It didn't include reputational impact. How many of yours have that in it? And yet their reputation just turned to crap as a result of them not paying attention to the bigger picture. Those things, our plans are limited, okay? I'm not saying planning is a useless thing. I agree with Ike Eisenhower. I think planning is invaluable. Just don't put too many eggs in the plan itself, because it's not going to work the way you thought it would. I can virtually guarantee that. Unless it's a small thing, okay? Small things like once in a year, once in 5 or 10 years. Plans are very effective and often can work quite well. So for that sort of thing, no problem. But the things that make history, almost every month now, don't fall into that category. Okay, the floods they had in Alberta, they're saying 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000 year event. Christchurch, 1 in 2,500 year. The two Hokkaido earthquakes in Japan, biggest in their entire history. They have a long history. And these things are happening every year, someplace. Maybe not in your backyard, but they do have flow-on consequences because of the international connections through supply chains and a whole host of other unexpected connections. Adaptive capacity and planning. Leadership. It enables all 13 indicators. You need to have good leaders. You need to have good leaders. Let me reword that. You need to be a good leader. We are all leaders. Some of us are leaders not in our job, but in our community, in our church, in our family. But on the job, you can still be a leader by becoming proactive, by being willing to speak up and tell the boss the bad news. Some organizations, they hate bad news. They will never be resilient as long as you hate bad news. If you hate bad news, you will have no idea what's really going on. You will never fix it, and when you get blindsided, you'll just get tipped over. Okay, so you got to learn to love bad news. Just treat it as change. Become change ready. Yeah. Co-creation and innovation for decisions. That was my earlier comment. Everyone who is involved in the problem should be involved in the solution. You'll get much better solutions. I was at a conference in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. There was a guy who had worked for, I don't remember exactly, but it was a transport authority in the U.S. I'm not very attuned, you have to forgive me, but I'm not very attuned to all of the acronyms and names of all of the thousands of organizations in the U.S. anymore. But he was reasonably high up in this nationwide transport organization, and he talked about the FAA's approach to regulation and improving air safety in the United States. He said 30, 40, 50 years ago, for a period of 20 or 30 years, the FAA, anytime there was a crash, they'd go and do their inspection, which is their responsibility, find out what really went on, and then they'd make a new regulation to improve things. Well, they did this for 20 or 30 years. Do you know how much the air safety record of the United States improved during that time? Pretty close to zero. Okay, so they decided, this isn't working, and it's expensive because you got all the compliance costs for all the participants, and you have all the cost of FAA doing the creation of these regulations and the monitoring and auditing of them. So they decided they were going to take a new approach. They were actually going to talk to the aircraft manufacturers and the air traffic controllers and the pilots and the maintenance people and say, we're not going to try and regulate our way out of for the industry anymore. We want to work with you to solve whatever the problems are. And they've done that for the last 15 or 20 years, or more or less. What was the consequence? They've had 60% improvement in air safety in the United States. This is his words, not mine. All right? It's a matter of getting the people involved in the problem involved in the solution. All of those different perspectives are going to give you a better solution than if you just make one up because you're so smart, you know, which is what we think about ourselves sometimes. I'm not trying to be too hard, sorry. Change happens every day, so should resilience be happening every day, building it every day. You only get good at what you practice. So we need to practice every day with business as usual embedded processes. In other words, processes that are already there, you're already using. Look at them. Look at your HR processes. Look at your safety processes. Look at your manufacturing process and say, if I tweak that about 5%, what implications, how could I tweak that 5% and improve my resilience? In some cases, we've seen dramatic increases in resilience as a result of small changes in process. So it doesn't cost you anything. Don't have to layer new resilience process over the top. Actually, I would encourage you, don't do that. The reason is because when the economy gets tight, guess what's the first thing to go? It's first in, first out. You know what that means? I'm sorry, last in, first out. So last process in gets cut. So all that resilience work you've just done, all those new processes, blood on the floor. All right. Whereas if you repurpose existing processes that are already positively impacting the bottom line, they're not going to get rid of those. That's how they do business. And if it's improving your resilience, these 13 indicators in various ways, various guises and interconnections, you're building these capacities and capabilities, they're not going to get rid of them because they're embedded. Okay, and it's not costing them much, maybe nothing, but maybe something, but not a lot. Sorry, forecasting only works in business as usual. Okay, trying to forecast the next disaster and its impact, you're largely wasting your time. Okay, we just don't understand the complex environment we live in well enough to be able to forecast effectively. It's okay for the shorter term things. Okay, so I'm not against forecasting. You know, I was chief financial officer for our university. We definitely forecasted. But every year it was wrong. It was not wildly wrong. But if we tried to forecast 5 or 10 years out, or the consequences of some major event, it would have been wildly wrong. We've lost 25% of our student population as a result of the earthquakes. Nobody forecasted that, sorry. So forecasting is good for short-term stuff, operational stuff, some short-term emergency planning, yes. But if you think you're going to deal with the life-threatening organization disaster, which you don't know about, experience counts. We've got an aging population, and we're just letting them retire. In fact, we're pushing them out. And we got new people coming in without transferring that knowledge, without transferring the social capital. That's the connections, the people they know, the people who are prepared to act on their behalf at 4 a.m. Those connections are just falling apart because we're not managing that process well. Bad idea. Never let a good disaster go to waste. And some of you know that, but we're not systematic at it. I tell you exactly what happens most of the time. We're good at capturing the operational learnings from our testings, our trials, and the real disasters we have. And we're terrible at spotting the strategic opportunities that just slip through our fingers because we, like that CEO, he had his eyes on the ground when things turned to custard, and he needed to spend at least some of his time looking at the horizon for the fresh opportunities coming his way. He missed it completely. And that's normal. But we need to change what normal is. Criticality of social capital. Complexity is the question that resilience answers. We live in a complex world, and for us to try and forecast and come up with systems that will automatically produce results, most of the time isn't going to work. There are instances where that's not true. None of these things are perfect solutions to everything. And redundancy and adaptability, they require moderation of efficiency. It's become all about efficiency for the last few decades, just in time this and efficiency that, and downsize something else till there are no spare capacity. So when some small thing goes wrong, bigger things happen. So we need to, I'm in favor of efficiency, but I'm also in favor of effectiveness. And we've lost the balance over the last couple of decades. We need to just tune things back a bit and find efficient ways of doing that. The Australian food industry, total amount of food in the country, 1 to 2 days on average in the households and 3 days in the supermarkets and warehouses. Whoa, and if a major city, you might only have 2 or 3 major warehouses. One of those burns down, you're in trouble. Okay, so two of the major food distributors in Australia, big retail food chains, got together and said, we can't afford to build a new warehouse just for ourselves. Are you prepared to work with me? There were 3 of them. One of them said, nah, you're a competitor. The other 2 said, yeah, we could do that. You use half of it, I'll use half of it. It provides us with both some buffer space. Neither of us have to make the full investment, so some collaboration. We both have some spare capacity, and we hope there'll never be a fire. Except in Australia and most places, there's a fire every year that burns something really necessary down. Fires are still the #1 cause of disasters, not all the other big things that we think about. So they were prepared to collaborate, and this was a more efficient solution, so I'm in favor of efficiency, but they actually took some action, and they created a more resilient food supply for their city. So there are things that we can do if we'll have a good hard look at them. And with that, I'll stop talking. I've been talking for at least an hour, and it was only supposed to talk for an hour, so I'll stop.